My wife asked for an open marriage, then cried betrayal when I slept with someone else. That's the short version. The full story? Much messier, far more humiliating, and if you ask me, deeply ironic. My name's Daniel, and I used to think love meant compromise. That's what I told myself when Ashley, my wife of 7 years, sat me down one evening with a strange calm in her eyes and said we needed to try something radical. We've both felt it, she said. We're distant, cold. Maybe being with other people will help us understand if we still want each other. She called it an experiment. She called it brave. She said, love isn't selfishness. If we find happiness elsewhere, we owe it to each other to let go. So I agreed, not because I wanted anyone else, but because I didn't want to lose her. But I was a fool, because it turned out she wasn't trying to test our love. She was already sleeping with someone else. Before everything fell apart, I would have told you Ashley was the love of my life. We met during freshman orientation. I was the introverted guy in a thrift store cardigan with a secondhand copy of Sylvia Plath in my lap. She was laughter and movement red lipstick, ripped jeans and paint on her fingers. I noticed her before she noticed me. When she finally did, she said, "You look like someone who keeps secrets in verse." That was her way of flirting. I was smitten instantly. From that moment on, we were inseparable. We built a world of private jokes, mid-afternoon naps, ramen dinners, and long walks through rainy streets. She pushed me out of my shell, and I grounded her when she spiraled. I thought we were perfect complements, chaos and calm, passion and patience. She painted wild abstracts. I wrote quiet poems. It made sense. After college, we moved to Portland to chase dreams. I took a teaching job to keep us afloat while she poured herself into her art. Money was tight, but we were young, and it felt romantic to struggle together. We lived in a one-bedroom apartment above a bakery, constantly smelling like sourdough and oil paint. We made love on a mattress on the floor, talked for hours about the future, made each other laugh until we cried. I thought that kind of intimacy was rare, sacred. When Ashley started gaining recognition, local exhibits, features and art blogs, I was thrilled. I was the one fixing her website late at night, arranging prints for buyers, hanging canvases before showings. "You're my rock," she'd say. I could never do this alone. I believed that. I'd put my own dreams on hold. I'd planned to pursue a master's in literature, but that meant time and money, two things we didn't have. Instead, I focused on being present, being supportive. I told myself my time would come. I told myself that love meant sacrifice. We got married in her aunt's backyard under tangled fairy lights and the smell of wet earth. Her dress was off-white with traces of paint on the sleeve because she'd been working on a last-minute piece. It made me love her more. We exchanged vows we wrote ourselves. Mine ended with, "You are my wildest story," she cried. The early years of our marriage were imperfect, but beautiful. We had fights over groceries, chores, forgotten anniversaries, but we always came back to each other. We had rituals, Sunday pancakes, handwritten notes tucked into lunchboxes, late-night movie marathons with popcorn and red wine. I thought those little things were the glue of something unbreakable. Looking back, maybe I ignored the signs, maybe I wanted it too much, but I truly believed we were forever. That belief cost me more than I ever expected. There were cracks, of course. No marriage is flawless. Sometimes she'd go quiet for days, buried in a creative slump. Other times, she'd lash out, short-tempered, dismissive. "You wouldn't understand," she'd snap when I tried to comfort her after a gallery rejection. I chalked it up to pressure, to passion. Artists are like that, I told myself. And maybe I wasn't perfect either. I worked long hours, brought grading home, fell asleep on the couch with papers still in my lap. But I always tried. I remembered anniversaries. I planned surprise weekend trips. I left notes on her pillow just to say I loved her. Still, something shifted after year 5. Her kisses grew shorter, her smiles more distracted. Our sex life dwindled from passionate to perfunctory. I'd wake up sometimes and she'd already be out the door. Or I'd come home and find her staring blankly at a canvas, not even noticing I was there. I thought it was just a phase, a rut. Every couple has them, right? But ruts don't last 2 years. 2 whole years of living like polite roommates. 2 years of silence over dinner. 2 years of me waiting, hoping, for her to come back to me. I didn't know how to reach her, and worse, I began to fear she didn't want to be reached. Even then I held on, because I remembered who we used to be, and I believed, foolishly, that love was enough to bring us back. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about slow decline. You never notice the damage until it's already deep. It began with her silences. I used to love Ashley's quiet, how she'd lose herself in thought, brush dancing over canvas, her brow furrowed in focus. But this was different. Detached. She stopped asking about my day. Conversation shrank to logistics. Did you pay the water bill? Or, I'll be late tonight. No warmth, no curiosity. Just function. Then came the criticism. Little things at first. The way I dressed. The books I read. God, Daniel, you're so predictable. Said with a smirk, half joking, but it stuck. She rolled her eyes when I suggested date nights. Ignored my texts for hours. Scoffed when I brought home flowers. We're not teenagers, she said once, laughing. That one hurt more than I admitted. She started staying out late. Gallery openings, artist meetups, just drinks with friends. I trusted her. I wanted to. But the unease built like rust. She guarded her phone like it held state secrets. Flipping it face down, taking it with her to the bathroom. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and find her scrolling, whispering into it. Sex became rare, and when it happened, it felt transactional, like she was somewhere else, her eyes vacant, her body present but absent. I tried to talk to her about it. She'd deflect, change the subject, accuse me of being needy. You always make it about you, she said once. That one broke something in me. Started walking on eggshells, afraid to upset her, afraid to ask for more. I cleaned more, cooked more, did the grocery runs. I bought tickets to her favorite band's concert. She said she'd rather go alone because it was a creative thing. I watched her drift further each day, and I blamed myself. Maybe I wasn't exciting enough. Maybe I'd let myself go. Maybe I didn't support her dreams enough. That's what love does when it starts slipping. It turns inward, makes you the villain in your own head. Still, I stayed. Still, I tried. But deep down, I knew the woman I fell in love with was disappearing, and I didn't know how to bring her back. The distance grew so gradually that I started to convince myself it was normal, that all long-term couples became strangers in slow motion, that the magic fade and what's left is just maintenance. But then came the gaslighting. Ashley had a way of making me question my own instincts. Once, I found an unfamiliar hoodie in the back seat of her car. She laughed, said it belonged to a gallery intern. "Don't be jealous," she said, kissing my cheek like I was a child. Another time, I overheard her whispering to someone named Mason at 2 a.m. When I asked, she rolled her eyes. "He's just an art dealer, you wouldn't get it." I started checking my own sanity. Was I becoming possessive, paranoid? Was I sabotaging the very thing I was trying to save? I tried to keep us close. I suggested weekend trips, couples counseling, even cooking classes, something, anything, to pull us back together. She'd shrug and say, maybe, or I'm too tired, or you're overthinking. The worst part was that I started believing she was right, that I was the problem. The day I overheard her laughing on the phone, deep, genuine laughter, the kind she hadn't shared with me in over a year, it gutted me. I realized she had joy, just not with me. The person she used to confide in, lean on, laugh with, that wasn't me anymore. I was the background noise in her life, the placeholder, the obligation. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was slowly being erased from my own marriage. That maybe, just maybe, she wanted it that way. It all came to a head one Sunday morning. I made her breakfast, her favorite, sourdough toast with avocado and poached eggs. I lit a candle, played her favorite playlist. She walked into the kitchen, glanced at the setup and said, "You don't have to try so hard, Daniel, it's just eggs." She didn't mean it as cruel, but it was. I sat across from her in silence, the eggs going cold between us. I looked at this woman, the one I had followed across the country, sacrificed for, written vows to, and for the first time, I felt like a stranger was sitting in her place. And the worst part? I still loved her. Even as she pulled away. Even as she chipped away at who I was. Even as she made me feel invisible. I love her, and I didn't know how much more of myself I could lose trying to hold on to someone who didn't want to be held. That was the beginning of the end, even if I didn't admit it yet. Ashley called it a necessary reset. We were on the couch, barely 2 feet apart yet feeling like we were in different time zones. She stared at her hands as she spoke, not at me. "I think we should try an open marriage," she said, voice calm, like she was suggesting we try a new restaurant. "We've been stuck, distant, whatever we have right now isn't working. Maybe seeing other people will help us figure out if we still choose each other. Or if we're just holding on out of fear." I didn't speak for a long time. I remember blinking at her, thinking maybe I'd misheard. She kept going. "I've read a lot about it. Healthy couples have done it and come back stronger. It's not about sex, it's about clarity, growth. Love shouldn't be selfish, Daniel. If being with someone else makes you happy, I'd want that for you. I wanted to scream, to shake her, ask her how the hell we got here, but all I said was, "Is there someone else?" She hesitated, just a flicker. Then, "No, I just think we owe it to ourselves to be honest, to explore. Don't you want to know if we're still right for each other?" I should have said no, should have drawn a line, but I was scared that refusing would push her further, scared that maybe, just maybe, she was right. Maybe this would fix us. So I agreed. With a knot in my chest, I told her, okay. What followed was the most humiliating month of my life. I downloaded dating apps, went on awkward coffees with strangers who talked about crystals or CrossFit. I felt like a teenager pretending to be a man. Meanwhile, Ashley seemed lighter. She stayed out later, came home smelling like unfamiliar cologne, humming songs I didn't recognize. I tried to convince myself it was working, that maybe this weird tea tour would bring us back together. Then one night, I came home early from a failed date and found her on the phone in the kitchen, laughing like she used to with someone else. She didn't hear me come in. I stood there, frozen, as she said, "I wish I could just fall asleep in your arms tonight." He's out. I walked back out the door and sat in my car for an hour, staring at the dashboard, trying to breathe. The next day I went through her laptop. I know I shouldn't have, but I needed truth, needed to know if I was crazy. I wasn't. Messages, hundreds of them, photos, calls. She'd been seeing him, Mason, for over 3 months. Their connection started long before she ever brought up the open marriage. I confronted her. She didn't deny it. She cried, said she was confused, said she never meant to hurt me. But she had, deeply. Because the open marriage wasn't a solution. It was a smokescreen. And I had walked right into it. The days after that confrontation were a blur. We didn't speak much. She moved into the guest room. I stopped trying. I went to work, came home, ate frozen meals and stared at walls. It was like mourning someone who was still alive. I thought a lot about the early days, how we used to reach for each other even in sleep, how I used to be the one who made her laugh. I wondered when exactly I became invisible. A week later, she asked if we could talk. We sat at the kitchen table, 2 ghosts haunting a shared space. "I didn't plan for it to go this way," she said, "but Mason, he understands me. He listens in ways you don't anymore. With him, I feel seen." I nodded. I'd run out of fight, then be with him. She looked surprised. "So, you're okay with ending this?" I almost laughed. "Okay?" "No, but I was done begging to be chosen." She moved out 2 weeks later, took her plants, her paintings, half the kitchen utensils, left behind a framed photo of us on our wedding day. I threw it in the trash the next morning. Everyone around me tried to be kind. My sister said, "Better now than 10 years in." My coworker brought me lasagna. My therapist said I was handling things gracefully. But none of them saw the nights I lay awake, replaying every moment, asking myself how I could have been so blind, how love could become betrayal so seamlessly. One night I scrolled through Ashley's public Instagram. She'd posted a picture of her and Mason at a gallery opening. Her caption read, "Grateful to be seen." I stared at that sentence for a long time. I had loved her with everything I had. But she didn't want love. She wanted escape. And she used my loyalty as her ticket out. The final straw came when she texted me, weeks after moving out. "Do you think we could still be friends?" she wrote. "I miss talking to you." Friend. It felt like insult layered atop injury. After everything, after the deception, the emotional whiplash, the slow erosion of our bond, she thought we could go back to casual banter and coffee catch-ups. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Some endings need silence. That night, I deleted every photo, every message, every trace of her from my phone. I changed the sheets. I boxed up the mug she made in pottery class. I lit a candle, not for her, but for me. Because I needed closure, and I wasn't going to wait for her to give it to me. That was the night I stopped waiting. And for the first time in months, I slept all the way through. Grief doesn't always look like sobbing into a pillow. Sometimes, it looks like sitting in your parked car for an hour because you can't remember why you left the house in the first place. That was my life for the first month after Ashley left, a fog. I went to work, answered emails, nodded in meetings, but I wasn't really there. I was an echo of myself, smiling when expected, speaking in pre-recorded sentences. My nights were the worst. I'd lie awake, my chest tight, the silence of the apartment pressing in like a weight. I missed her. Not the version who hurt me, but the girl I'd met at 19. the one who laughed at my bad poetry and danced barefoot in the kitchen. I couldn't reconcile that Ashley with the one who walked out. I stopped writing, stopped cooking. My fridge was a graveyard of takeout containers, laundry piled up. I didn't call friends back. Even my sister's check-ins became one-word replies. Fine, busy, tired. Truth was, I wasn't sure who I was without her. For years, my identity had been wrapped in the idea of us, husband, support system, teammate. Without her, I felt hollow, unnecessary. One night, I found myself scrolling through our old texts. Back when we used emojis, inside jokes, bad selfies, I ended up on our wedding video. I watched myself say vows I'd written from the deepest part of my soul, and felt like I was watching a stranger. I turned it off and threw my phone across the room. That was the night I almost called her. I picked up the phone, dialed the number, listened to it ring twice. Then I hung up. Because even if I missed her, even if my whole body ached for the comfort of what we were, I couldn't go back. She had made her choice, and I had to live with it. So I started therapy, reluctantly at first, but it was either talk to someone or drown in my own thoughts. The therapist, I didn't have answers, but I kept going. Because pain is a process, and I was tired of pretending I was fine. Dr. Myers encouraged me to do small things, write a journal, take walks, cook one real meal a week. At first, I resisted. What was the point of roasting vegetables when my life felt scorched? But then one night, I did it anyway. Roasted carrots, burned half of them, ate in silence. It wasn't joy, but it was movement. I also started running, not because I liked it, but because I needed to exhaust myself, to sleep without thinking, to sweat something out of me, grief, bitterness, shame. Each mile felt like penance. But with each run, I felt the fog thinning. I still had bad nights, nights when the silence screamed and the bed felt too big. When I'd see couples on the street and feel something cave in my chest, but there were moments, fleeting, fragile, where I felt a spark, a glimmer that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of my story. One day, Dr. Myers asked me what I would tell a friend going through the same thing. I said that he's not broken, that healing isn't linear, that just because someone stopped loving you doesn't mean you're unlovable. She smiled. Good, now say it to yourself. I couldn't, not yet. But I wanted to believe it. And that was a start. The biggest shift came quietly. One morning, I woke up and didn't feel dread. The sun through the window looked warm, not mocking. I made coffee and didn't feel like a ghost. I still missed her sometimes. I still caught my breath when I saw her handwriting on an old receipt, or when a stranger wore her perfume. But I also started missing myself less. The version of me that had been buried under compromise, under silence, under the weight of trying too hard for someone who had already let go. I wrote a poem, my first in months. It wasn't good, but it was mine. And that, somehow, made all the difference. 'Cause maybe healing isn't about forgetting. Maybe it's about reclaiming. And piece by piece, I was starting to do just that. Recovery isn't a single moment. It's a mosaic, tiny fractured pieces coming together into something that starts to resemble wholeness. For me, it began with Lena. We'd worked together for years. She taught biology down the hall from my English classroom. We'd exchanged casual hallway greetings, traded coffee runs, laughed at staff meetings, but I never really saw her until one afternoon, months after Ashley left, when she knocked on my classroom door. "You forgot your lunch again," she said, holding out a sandwich. "And don't even try to lie, I checked the fridge." It was a small thing, but that moment cracked something open. After that, we started having lunch together. At first, we talked about lesson plans, annoying parents, grading nightmares. But slowly, our conversations wandered. Books, movies, our worst dates. She had this way of listening that made me feel like I mattered, like my words didn't bounce off walls. She never asked about Ashley, never pushed, but I found myself telling her anyway. Not all at once, in pieces, and she didn't flinch. "You were always more than what she saw," she said one day, softly. I didn't know how to respond, but I carried that sentence for weeks. Lena wasn't a rebound, she was a reminder. That connection didn't have to be painful. That intimacy didn't have to cost you your self-worth. One rainy Friday, she reached across the table and took my hand, just held it, and I didn't pull away. I still had scars, still had nights I woke up angry or lonely or both, but those moments came less frequently. The grief didn't leave, but it stopped shouting. I started writing again, not just poetry but stories. I joined a local writers group, shared my work, people clapped, a few even cried. I remembered what it felt like to create for myself, not just survive. I cut my hair, bought new sheets, rearranged the furniture, small, symbolic things, but they made the space feel like mine again. And maybe most importantly, I forgave myself for staying too long, for loving too hard, for not knowing when to walk away. Because healing isn't about who hurt you. It's about who you choose to become after. Lena and I didn't rush. We took long walks after school, rain or shine. Sometimes we didn't talk at all, just moved side by side in quiet rhythm. I found peace in those silences, so different from the ones with Ashley that had felt suffocating. When Lena laughed, it wasn't sharp or dismissive, it was warm, inclusive. She made me feel like I could breathe again, like I wasn't walking on eggshells. One evening, she invited me over for dinner. I almost said no. The idea of stepping into someone else's home, into something new, felt terrifying. But I went. Her apartment smelled like garlic and fresh basil. She cooked pasta from scratch, played old jazz records. When we sat down to eat, she lit a candle. Not for romance, she said, but because every meal deserves a little ceremony. That night, we didn't kiss. We didn't need to. Instead, she walked me to the door, looked me in the eyes, and said, "You're doing better than you think." I believed her. For the first time, I believed someone when they said I was enough. It didn't erase what happened, but it softened the sharp edges. And with every passing day, I began to realize I wasn't just recovering. I was becoming a version of myself that was quieter, maybe, more guarded, but also kinder, wiser, and strangely, stronger. I no longer saw my past as a chain. I saw it as compost. Means, trotting pain transformed into fertile ground. Something was growing in me again. And this time, I would not let it die. Months passed. The world kept spinning. One morning, I looked in the mirror and didn't see a man broken by betrayal. I saw someone who had survived, someone who had rebuilt. I ran into Ashley once, at a bookstore of all places. She looked startled, told me I looked different. "I feel different," I replied. And I meant it. We talked for a few minutes, polite, surface level. Then she left, and I didn't look back. Because I no longer needed her to understand what she'd lost. I finally understood what I'd gained. And for the first time in a long time, I was proud of who I was becoming. The invitation came out of nowhere. Ashley emailed me. Subject line, "Coffee?" I stared at it for a full 5 minutes. It had been almost a year since we last spoke. She was the one who had walked away, the one who traded 7 years of marriage for someone else's arms, and now she wanted to meet? Curiosity won. I said yes. We met at a small cafe near where we used to live. I arrived early. She came in wearing sunglasses, hair tied back, looking uncertain. Not the confident, chaotic woman I remembered. "Daniel," she said, almost like a question. "Ashley." We sat. She fidgeted with her cup. I waited. Finally, she sighed. "I made a mistake." I didn't flinch, didn't speak, just let her talk. Asian and I. It didn't work. He was exciting, sure, but it faded fast. He didn't get me, not like you did. And I was wrong. About everything. About what I needed, about what we had. She looked at me, eyes glistening. "I miss you." The old me might have broken at that. Might have reached across the table, desperate to fix what was broken. But that version of me no longer existed. I took a sip of my coffee, calm, collected. "Thank you for saying that." She blinked. "That's it?" "I appreciate the apology," I said, "but we're not the same people anymore." "I know," she whispered, "but maybe we could try again. Take it slow." I shook my head. "Ashley, I'm happy now, healthier, I've found peace, and someone who values me without needing to lose me first." She looked stunned. "Her name is Lena," I added softly. "She knows everything, and she stayed anyway." Ashley looked down at her hands. "I thought I had time. I thought you'd wait." I smiled, not cruel, just honest. I waited, then I chose me. We parted with a hug. Hers lingered a little longer. But I walked away with a light heart. Not because I'd won, but because I no longer needed to. The next few minutes were a strange dance of memory and awkwardness. She asked about my job, about my writing. I told her I joined a local writers group, that I was submitting short stories to magazines. She smiled in that proud but sad way that people wear when they realize they gave up something good. She talked about her own life briefly. Mason had moved out 3 months ago. Apparently he'd grown distant, said she was too much. The irony was almost comical. I thought being free would make me happier, she said, but it just made me realize how alone I was without you. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. I let her sit with that silence. She kept glancing at me, maybe waiting for a crack, some sign I still loved her. But I'd mourned that love already. I'd buried it, gave it a eulogy and 1,000 sleepless nights. She finally asked, "Do you still think about us?" I looked out the window. The street was bathed in golden afternoon light. People walked dogs, carried groceries, laughed into their phones. Life went on. "I think about the lessons," I said. "I think about who I was back then and how hard he tried, and I'm proud of him, but I don't want to be him again." Her face tightened. "I didn't expect you to move on so easily." "It wasn't easy," I said, "but it was necessary." Then I reached into my bag and pulled out a thin chapbook, my first published collection of poems. I handed it to her. "You're in here," I said. "Some of it's angry, some of it's forgiving, all of it's honest." She traced the cover. "You really found yourself." "I had to," I replied. "You weren't going to do it for me." She nodded, quiet. When we stood to leave, she lingered. "If I'd asked you sooner, do you think we'd have made it?" I looked at her, not the woman I married, not the one who left, but the one sitting here now, still searching. "No," I said gently, "because I still needed to lose you to find me." I left her there, at the cafe. Sunlight caught the edge of her face as I turned away. And for the first time, I didn't carry her with me. Later that evening, I told Lena about the meeting. She didn't flinch, didn't get jealous or insecure. She just nodded and asked, "How do you feel?" I thought about it, really thought. "Free," I said, "and finally full." We sat in silence for a while, our hands entwined on the couch, the hum of the city outside our window. There was no victory dance, no dramatic closure. Just peace. The kind that comes not from revenge but from reclaiming yourself. Actually had been a chapter, a loud, beautiful, painful chapter. But my story had turned a page. And I couldn't wait to see what came next. I didn't follow Ashley's life after that. But life, as it often does, doesn't like unfinished business. The first sign came not from her, but from Lena. She sat me down one evening, face unreadable. "Ashley called me," she said. My stomach dropped. "She said you two saw each other again," Lena continued, voice steady. "She said, you're only with me because you feel guilty, that you still love her, and that I should step aside." It took me a second to process, then another to realize I wasn't angry, I was disappointed. "She's lying," I said simply. "I told her the truth when we met, that I've moved on, that I'm with you because I choose you." Lena searched my face. "I believe you, but it still stung." Later that night, I called Ashley. She picked up on the first ring. "You had no right," I said, cold. "I had every right," she snapped. "You think I don't see it? The way you looked at me at that cafe. You still feel something, Daniel. You're just too afraid to admit it." "What I feel is pity," I replied, "for the woman you could have been, for the love you threw away." She laughed bitterly. "Don't pretend you're over it. You still write about me. I live in your poems." "You live in my past," I said, "and that's where you'll stay." She tried again, tears this time. "Please, let's try again. I know I messed up, but we had something real. Lena doesn't get you like I do." "I'm not leaving, Lena," I said, "and I'm done letting you rewrite our story to make yourself the hero." I hung up before she could answer. And for the first time, I didn't feel shaken. I felt clear. The next day I told Lena everything. She listened, then simply said, "Thank you for not hiding it." That weekend we went to the farmer's market, bought too many peaches, cooked a pie from scratch. We laughed. We loved. We lived. Meanwhile, Ashley's stories kept unraveling. Friends distanced, her online presence grew erratic, another failed job, another public meltdown. She tried to reach me once more, a handwritten letter this time, saying she'd always be waiting. I didn't reply. Because healing isn't about going back. It's about walking forward, even when they call your name behind you. Especially then. What Ashley didn't understand was that love, once fractured by betrayal, doesn't heal through desperation. She showed up at my apartment 2 days after the call. Lena wasn't home. Ashley wore that same perfume, familiar and foreign. Her eyes looked puffy, but she smiled like nothing was broken. "I just want to talk," she said. "I don't," I replied, blocking the doorway. She leaned against the doorframe. "Used to look at me like I was your future. And now I look at you like a cautionary tale." That stung. I saw it in her flinch. But she pushed forward. "Please, Daniel, just coffee, closure." Against my better judgment, I agreed, on neutral ground, in daylight. She was all nostalgia. Jokes from the past, old songs, memories I'd long buried, and for a second, I remembered the girl I once loved. Then she ruined it. "I talked to Lena again," she said. "Told her I forgave her." "For what?" I asked. "For standing between us." I stared. "There is no us, Ashley." She leaned in, voice low. "She doesn't know your darkness. She hasn't seen your rage. I have. And I stayed. I still was." "No," I said. "You didn't stay. You left." She grabbed my hand. "Because I was scared. But I'm not anymore. I want this. I want you." I pulled away. "I don't want to be wanted like a trophy reclaimed out of spite." She looked desperate now. "She'll never love all of you. Not the way I did." "She doesn't need to fix me," I said, "because I'm not broken anymore." Ashley stared, defeated. "So, that's it?" "That's grace," I replied, walking away without burning the ground beneath me. She didn't cry this time. She just stood up, nodded once, and left. I watched her go, this woman who once undid me with a look, and felt nothing. Not hatred. Not longing. Just the gentle relief of release. That night, I lay beside Lena, her breathing steady in sleep, and realized just how much peace cost. It's not free. It's built layer by layer on hard truths, brutal goodbyes, and the unwavering refusal to settle for anything less than mutual respect. Ashley represented the echo of a life I once accepted out of fear. Fear of loneliness, of starting over, of not being enough. But Lena, she was the answer I didn't know I was allowed to hope for. She never asked me to erase my past. She simply held space for my present. And in that space, I grew. So when I received Ashley's last message, a single line, "If you ever change your mind, I'll be waiting," I didn't reply. Because the man she's waiting for no longer exists. And the one who does. He's already home. 6 months later, I proposed to Lena. It wasn't a grand gesture, no flash mob, no skywriting. Just a quiet afternoon in our apartment, flowers still on her cheek from the bread we'd baked together. I pulled out the ring and said, "I've never been more sure of anything." She cried. I did too. Because love, the real kind, doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers through consistency, through late-night tea and shared playlists, through forgiveness and choosing each other again and again. We got married in a small garden surrounded by people who'd seen us grow. There were no speeches about overcoming heartbreak, just joy. Ashley didn't show up, though she was invited, a gesture Lena insisted on, not out of pity, but peace. "I want to start our life without shadows," she said. And so we did. I published my second book. Lena opened her own studio. We traveled to places we only dreamed of. Italy, Morocco, Japan. We got a dog. Unexpectedly, a daughter. She has her mother's eyes and my stubbornness, and when she laughs, it's like the world resets. Sometimes I still write about the past, but not to dwell. To remember how far I've come. The morning of our wedding, I woke up before Lena. I watched her sleep, the sunlight crawling up her shoulder, and felt something I couldn't name, something beyond happiness. Peace, maybe, gratitude, awe. We wrote our own vows. Mine weren't perfect, my voice cracked, my hands shook, but every word was true. "I don't promise a life without storms," I said, eyes locked on hers, "but I promise to never leave when they come." Lena smiled through tears. After the ceremony, people danced barefoot on the grass. My sister gave a toast that made everyone cry. We played a playlist of songs Lena and I had collected over the years, each one tied to a moment, a look, a turning point. It wasn't just a wedding. It was a reclamation. Of joy. Of self. Of love built, not found. Married life didn't change us overnight. We still argued over who left the dishes, still had days when everything felt too much. But every night, without fail, we chose each other. We created rituals: morning coffee on the balcony, Thursday night pasta, Sunday bookstore dates. Not because we had to, but because we wanted to build a rhythm we could dance to for years. One day, my daughter asked, "Daddy, were you always happy?" I paused, and knelt beside her and said, "No, but I learned how to find it and how to protect it." Later that night, as Lena read to her, I stepped onto the balcony, mug in hand, and looked out at the city lights. Not to chase anything, but to honor the stillness I used to run from. Because now, I know. The most beautiful stories aren't the ones filled with drama or pain. They're the quiet ones. The ones where people healed. Where they grow gardens in the ruins. Where they love softly, fiercely, every day. And write new chapters, not out of revenge, but out of hope.